Hello, everyone. Welcome to my very first episode of my very first podcast, The Eidolon Wall, where this podcast is going to be where I talk about all things Final Fantasy, characters, lore, backstory, etc., etc. And I hope, and obviously, I'm going to be very nervous about this because this is my first time ever doing a podcast like this. So hopefully, I will be entertaining. It will be entertaining for you guys, and hopefully, it will be. Hopefully, you guys will enjoy this. And I figured, what better way to start the very first episode of my podcast with going to the origins of this legendary series. This a series that has spanned 37 years of amazing games, successful wonderful stories, characters, music, and just scenes that have enraptured and captured many fans of all ages, and fans that have grown with the series, and fans that have just even like grown them and found themselves within the series. Like I personally myself have found myself within the series. And again, like I said, what better way to start to do this first episode than to go to the beginning? We are going right back to the 80s with 1987, December 18th, 1987. Now, the 80s was, of course, a time where video games weren't as popular as they are now. They weren't as big. They weren't as mainstream. They were a lot of the famous companies like Mario. A lot of the famous franchises like Mario, Metroid, Legend of Zelda. They were finding their feet in the 80s. They were finding their feet. They had just started. They were starting to make their mark. But around that time, there were no RPGs that really stood out. No RPGs or JRPGs that really stood out, that really made their mark in the video game world. So Square Enix, then called SquareSoft at that time, having some success with the first installment of Dragon Quest, Dragon Quest One, also called Dragon Warriors in Japan. They decided to at the time they weren't doing so great. So they decided to go out with try and do a swan song, a last hurrah, to try and see if they can get themselves back. And that is when they created Final Fantasy. They created Final Fantasy. Originally, it was going to be just a one-off game, the Final Fantasy. They were going to make it as a last swan song. But obviously, of course, they could not have predicted how the game would have taken off. People were instantly in love with the story of it, the characters, the world, which for its time was revolutionary. And like obviously, it's all 8-bit back those days. It was all 8-bit. It wasn't as there was no ray tracing graphics. There were no realistic looking characters. There were no background. No pre-rendered backgrounds. It was all just 8-bit in those days. So they didn't have a lot to work with. But for what they did back then, they done very well. And like I said, they created Final Fantasy as a way to try and see if they can have one more success before things went bad for them. And yeah, it turned out pretty well. And of course, this led to the release of, as I said, on the 18th of December, 1987, on the Famicom. It was originally released on the Famicom. The Nintendo Entertainment System. Originally released on the Nintendo Entertainment System, Final Fantasy was born. And obviously, many of you knows about Final Fantasy, but I will obviously explain for the sake of the podcast. The first Final Fantasy took place in a fantasy medieval setting, and with the RPGs, of course, role playing game, they obviously wanted players to have different options to play as, different characters to play as, so you could have a party of people. You could have because it's all turn based, and in the original Final Fantasy, you could have up to 4 party members, and you boot up the game, and you get the option of choosing four classes. Oh no, you get four characters out of I believe six classes. So you had the knight, you had the thief, you had the white mage, the black mage, you had the red mage, who was a mix of both black and white. You had the monk. So you had a wide range of characters. You had a wide range of characters. I might have already said monk. No, I didn't say monk. Yeah, you had a wide range of characters to choose from, and you obviously name them. You could put your own names onto them. And yeah, you could just go off, grind, and just do whatever on the thing. But of course, it being a story-based game, it starts off with, and it has a nice starting, because it starts off with each of these warriors has a crystal. A prevalent theme in the Final Fantasy that would become a recurring theme in the Final Fantasy series is the crystal. Each of these warriors had a crystal that they took with them to meet the King of Cornelia in Final Fantasy One, who was undergoing a bit of problems because the Princess of Cornelia, Princess Sarah, was kidnapped by their greatest knight Garland. And this, of course, and then so the Warriors of Light, as they would soon become called, they would soon be called hereafter. They then proceeded to go and rescue Princess Sarah, thus beginning their adventure in the world of Final Fantasy. And of course, and it leads to a whole bunch of different adventures. They go to 3 different continents. They fight the 4 fiends who are guarding each crystal, each of the 4 crystals. They restore power to those crystals, thus bringing balance back to the world. And it all culminates in a final battle with the very first villain of the series, Garland. The very first villain, and the first incarnation of chaos as well, because Garland also brings about chaos, who would then become another recurring theme in the series. And this game was generally well received when it came out. People praised the story, they praised the characters, the combat, because around that time, turn-based combat wasn't a big thing as it is now. Not many games had done it, and Square Enix basically popularized it. They took, the Squaresoft, they popularized it. They took the turn-based, they made it work for Final Fantasy. They made it easy for players to understand. Excuse me. They made it easy for players to understand, so anyone could just put in Final Fantasy, choose their characters, and go off on their journey. They could start their Final Fantasy journey. And for many players, Final Fantasy 1 was the start of their journey. Personally, for me, it wasn't my start. My start was with Final Fantasy 7, but I will talk about that in another episode. And yeah, it ends up paving the way for the series we know now. And again, it was a very good series. It was a very good swan song. Because as I said, they were fully expecting it to be the only game in the series. They were, hence the name Final Fantasy. What of course I didn't expect was the fact that the series would take off and do so well. And they even sparked many adverts, like TV adverts, like commercials for American viewers. It sparked a whole bunch of merchandise and art, and just a big massive fan base. Even with the first game, the fan base had a big fan base had already been created. With there was even a story of a father who bought Final Fantasy for his kids. He tried it himself, and he fell in love with the series. He loved the game, and so he then played the game with his kids. And that is a story that they turned into a commercial. Thank you. Sorry, everyone. Yeah, they then turned that into a commercial, which they aired in Japan, and I believe they called it I can't remember what they called it. I think it was called something like, I can't remember. And but yeah, it was generally well received game, and as a precursor for the turn-based games we have today, It introduced a lot of mechanics. Again, party members, equipment like weapons and items that you can equip and swap out, magic that you could buy and use. Like all, it started incorporating all sorts of things that generally not been seen in video games before in that time. And a lot of these mechanics a lot of these mechanics have obviously are popular today, with Final Fantasy, of course, still doing the turn-based, well, the turn-based system with some of the games. MP, weapons, equipment, all sorts of things. So it's led to a whole bunch of mechanics which are still prevalent today. And yeah, it's led to the RPG series, the RPG genre, just taking off, being popularized, and being one of the most successful game genres we have today, with RPG games generally earning some of the biggest money for developers. It's not the biggest. I won't say it's the biggest earner, but RPGs are definitely up there with some of the bigger earners, and that's mostly because of Final Fantasy. These days, when you think of when someone says Final Fantasy, people who've been for the series. When you say RPGs, people who've been in the series for many times, for many years, they will most likely say Final Fantasy when you think of when you mention RPGs. And this just shows how synonymous with RPG Final Fantasy has become. It has popularized the genre. It has made people fall in love with the genre. Many RPGs these days, like many of those games, are made with inspiration from Final Fantasy. And I would not say it's a far-fetched stretch to say that because of Final Fantasy 1, a lot of RPG games exist today. It has paved the way for all sorts of RPGs and JRPGs to be made and for people to fall in love with, such as Persona, such as Persona. You've got you got the Persona series, you got the Tales series, a whole bunch of RPGs and JRPGs that most likely wouldn't be as good as they are today or as loved if they had not been taken inspiration from Final Fantasy and the impact it had on the RPG genre. It's not even a stretch to say that it rocketed the genre and has made it, and it basically took it off in a direction where it is going nowhere but up. And that is all because of one game, Final Fantasy 1. And okay, so and I've also spoken about the origins of Final Fantasy. I'll get into the characters of Final Fantasy. Now, I have said about the different job classes in Final Fantasy. The one thing with the characters in Final Fantasy, even with name characters such as Cloud, Squall, Tidus, Lightning, Clive, all of these characters, because of Final Fantasy, all of these main protagonists all share one title that has become synonymous with the Final Fantasy series, has become a staple of the Final Fantasy series, and that title is Warrior of Light. A title that emphasizes their heroic place in the story, the fact that they are the writers of the story. They're just not the cast. They're just not just the cast. They're the writers. They're the architects of the story, and that they are the bearers of the crystal in some shape or form. And that is again because of Final Fantasy 1 bringing us the term Warrior of Light. With even some games like the Dissidia series, the Dissidia PSP series, where Warrior of Light became a very prevalent term. And yeah, and it's and not only is it a term to describe the heroes, it's now even in popular culture, it's even become a term to describe someone who has, like, I've personally seen a whole bunch of people use it, where it's become a term to describe someone who has that kind of heroic spirit, that selfless spirit, who will help someone regardless of whether they get reward or not, someone who looks out for people. And personally, for me, I try and act like that because of Final Fantasy, because these Warriors of Light have inspired me, and that is what they tried to do with these characters from the first game. They wanted people to see that these were characters that you could love, you could take inspiration from, you could call them heroes, and hence that is again because of the term Warrior of Light. Looking at the Twitch chat as well, we see Magical Valkyrie. Hello. It was heavily inspired by D&D. Yes, many themes from Final Fantasy, such as monsters, spells, etc. They were taken from Final Fantasy, from D&D. Final Fantasy is heavily inspired from D&D. It takes much inspiration and many influences from D&D, with D&D being the most popular RPG game at the time, not video game, just game in general, with D&D played a lot in the 80s and even played a lot today. Also looking in the Twitch chat, we see Bronx come in as well. Hello, Bronx. Some of us crawled through FF1 so you younger folk could walk with FF7. That the RPG babies could sprint with 16 and 7 Rebirth. You're welcome. Yes, exactly. Because of Final Fantasy 1, as I said earlier, because of Final Fantasy 1, we wouldn't have Final Fantasy 16 with its amazing soundtrack and the amazing characters and world. We wouldn't have 7, which has become the most popular Final Fantasy in the series. Much to my chagrin, because I don't personally like F7 that much, but I digress. Or, we wouldn't even have my favorite Final Fantasy of all time and my favorite video game of all time, Final Fantasy 9. We wouldn't have any of that if it wasn't for Final Fantasy 1 bringing the series its origins and taking off in such a way as to be an inspiring legend. A legend that has grown for over 37 years. I myself was only I wasn't even born when it came out. I wasn't even born when it came out. So that just shows how long it has been going. This legend's been going for. That makes me sound very old though. But yeah, as I said, we will talk about the characters now as well. Now I mentioned the classes. As I answered Vouch's question, Final Fantasy was heavily inspired by D&D. And this is also shown in the classes you can have. So you've got the fighter, who's basically the tank, the tank character you'd find in D&D. You've got the monk, who's like the martial arts expert, using barehanded to fight. You've got the thief, the rogue, the thief/rogue, who will try and steal items and is very agile. It's very and it was very, FIFA is very agile and is generally for more people who want evasion and accuracy. You've got the white mage, who, as many people could tell, you're a healer. You use healing spells, support spells. You are the party's backbone because you keep them alive. You've got the black mage, you've got the black mage who uses offensive magic like fire, thunder, blizzard, flare. Black mages a black mage who brought forth, who led the way for the most famous black mage in the series. The famous black mage in the series, Vivi Orniter from Final Fantasy IX, one of the most beloved characters in the series, and again, possibly the most famous black mage. So you've got a lot of these classes paved the way for other characters who were influenced from these classes. You've got the red mage, who is basically a jack of all trades. Red mage can use white and black magic, so you got a nice balance. So again, you had 6 classes that you could just choose which team of these classes you wanted, and you could just basically do the team you wanted. You can get yourself a nice balance. You could play how you wanted, and it led to a lot of people enjoying it, a lot of people loving it. The freedom of that time for those classes to have. And even later characters tend to follow these classes, even loosely, like Cloud, referencing FF7 again. Cloud, he's more of a warrior. He's more of a knight, but using great swords. You've got in the same game, Tifa as the monk. You've got Zell from FF8 being the monk. Excuse me. or Garnet from Final Fantasy 9 being a white mage. All these classes led to so many of the characters that are beloved today following these mechanics of these job classes. And again, even obscure ones. Like you got Waka from Final Fantasy X. He you could say he's a monk. You could say he's the monk in that game because he doesn't use a conventional weapon. He uses a blitzball. Or you could say, or and it even led to a bit more freedom as well, like in Final Fantasy 12, where they expanded on. They went away from the simple job classes for a whole new ones like Time Mage, Shikari, like, who are like katana wielders like Ukari, like, and battle mages, stuff like that. So the series constantly expanded on these classes that all stemmed from the first game. And again, there was a lot of freedom in these days because of these classes. And not and then they didn't just stop at those classes as well, because in the same game, once you get to a certain point in the game, you can actually upgrade these classes to the next level. So you've got warrior turning to knight, you've got monk turn into the master, you've got thief becoming a ninja, you've got white mage becoming white wizard, and black wizard, you got white, black, and red wizard respectively. So it wasn't just these first six classes, but of course they're also their upgrades. And honestly, it led to just a whole bunch of characters getting created that followed these mechanics in some shape or form. Some characters that are massively loved today. Some mechanics that are massively loved today, and again, even in like a game like Final Fantasy 16, Jill from 16. You could say she's a red mage or a white mage, because she has healing. Or you got Torgal can heal. You could say Torgal's the white mage. You got and Clive is the knight. So even in obscure games like 16, like where the mechanics are obscure, you still got some semblance of these mechanics that all started from the first game 37 years ago. Let's check in with Twitch chat. We've got Val. Also, just quick correction: Dragon Warrior was the title of Dragon Quest in the West until Dragon 8 Quest on PS2. Okay. Thank you for that correction, Valk. I'm not the greatest knowledge. I don't have the greatest knowledge on Dragon Quest. So thank you for that correction. White Mage is basically cleric from D&D. Yes, as Valk has asked. Don't forget the best class, Mascot. Even some obscure classes like Mascot in Final Fantasy X Part 2. Came from these classes from the first Final Fantasy. We also have one of my mods, T-Shaw, popping in. What job system would you say the best between FF1 and FF3? FF3, because FF3 took the job system. FF3 took the job system from FF1 and expanding on it, giving us more jobs, the freedom to choose between the jobs at will, more abilities for these jobs. So there was a lot more freedom when Final Fantasy 3 came out for these jobs. If we were going for the job system, however, though, I would say 5 is the best. 5 is the best. No worries, and thank you for joining. Thank you for joining us on break, T-Shaw, and thank you for that question. But yeah, those were the classes that you could use in the first Final Fantasy game, and these 6 classes, they were generally fun classes. I usually used a warrior, a thief, a white mage, and a black mage. I went basic. Sometimes I would also switch out the thief for a monk if I were on different playthroughs, because the monk is a pretty good class, especially if you don't give him a weapon. He does insane damage. So that is generally what you'd have with the characters, and not just the characters as well, but Final Fantasy has also, the very first Final Fantasy also gave way to, again, beautiful worlds. Like, the world is kind of basic in Final Fantasy 1. Again, they did not have much to work with. So they had to go with what they had. But they still brought us an expansive world that you could explore. You know, you could get an airship, you could get a boat, so you could make it for easier travel. But you could still explore around the world. You could battle monsters, get XP, raise your character's levels, and it was just basically you being able to live out your fantasy, if you had one, your fantasy, pun not intended, of going on an adventure like this. Just going on an adventure. Go on an adventure. It was very Lord of the Rings-ish, you could say. It was in the same vein as Lord of the Rings. People on an adventure, and it brought this first game brought forth, led paved the way for some of the amazing stories that we've had in the Final Fantasy series altogether. Because this one game has paved the way for the popular story of Final Fantasy VII, the absolutely emotional and beautiful story of Final Fantasy IX. You've got the story of prejudice and real life war problems in 16, and even in the MMO they still constant references to this first game. Keep it, so people can always see references and callbacks to where it all started, to this game's origins, to this game's precursor. Because as you might expect, a legend has to start from somewhere. It has to start from somewhere. It has to have an origin, and this is the origin for the world, the legend that is Final Fantasy. And another thing that Final Fantasy One paved the way for as well. And this is the thing that I want to say, this is the thing that Final Fantasy is most known for. And I'm sure many of you can agree with this. The music. Final Fantasy 1 was absolutely celebrated and acknowledged very highly for its musical soundtrack. An orchestra music that has never wavered. It has never wavered. It's never gotten any worse. It's never been like, it's never left people lacking. There's always amazing music to go with the situation, whether you're just traveling through the fields, whether you're in battle, whether you're in a town or a cave, or a dungeon, you've always got amazing music, which really sets the mood for this world that you're in. It sets the mood, and it makes you feel like, personally for me, it makes me feel like I'm immersed in the story, because the music just they've made the music that on point, where it encapsulates, it captures. I think I used two different words there, but you know what I mean. It captures the true essence of Final Fantasy, a fantasy world where magic and monsters and princesses and kings and knights all exist, and you have now become part of this world by clicking that start button, naming your characters, and venturing forth. You have joined that legend, and that is what the music, in my opinion, helps you feel with that. You feel like you have become part of something bigger, something better, a grand adventure, and you have. And it's not, it's honestly one of the reasons why Final Fantasy is well known for the music, because there's always phenomenal music. And again, that's all started with Final Fantasy 1. But yeah, and again, I said about the story. The story is basic. The story is basic. And a lot of people actually think that because it's the first Final Fantasy, there's not much story. But there is. Because I already said about the four warriors go to a kingdom with with 4 crystals in hand. They defeat Garland at the old Chaos Shrine. They defeat Garland at the old shrine, rescue Princess Sarah, and they are then tasked with going around the world and bringing power back, bringing power and magic back to the 4 crystals that maintain the balance of the world. But of course, it's not easy, because at each crystal is an enemy that make up of 4 enemies that have they have shown up in the Final Fantasy series in most of the games in some shape or form. They are the four fiends. You've got Kraken, you've got Kraken the water fiend. You've got Marilith the fire fiend. You've got Tiamat the wind fiend, and then you've also got Lich, the Earth Fiend. So these four fiends protect these crystals, and only by killing these fiends can the warriors then restore the crystals. And by restoring by restoring the crystals, they are able to go to where Garland is. They are able to create a time loop. They're able to create a portal into a time loop that Garland has created. A time that God has created where he constantly is reborn and he dies. He is constantly reborn, he dies, and he becomes the being that would also be synonymous with the devil, with darkness, with terror incarnate, and that being is chaos. Garland becomes chaos. Chaos that is generally seen as the main overarching antagonist of the series, the main driving villainous force. Because chaos appears in some shape or form. Where it's in this game, you've got big bad demon chaos that Garland becomes. You've got Chaos, the god of discord from Final Fantasy Dissidia, which I've covered on my channel before. You've got that chaos. You've got Chaos in 13 Lightning Returns, where it's a force that is trying to disrupt time and trying to bring about the end of the world and take people away, and you've got to fight against it. It always comes back in some shape or form during the series, and it always starts from this game. It always starts from this time loop, from Garland going into the past and making this time loop where he's constantly reborn. He constantly has to fight. He constantly has to die. And so the warriors go back in time 2,000 years before the start of the game. 2,000 years to where chaos first existed, to where Garland was sent back and started the time loop. So they go back to 2,000 years. They fight Garland in a big epic battle in the first major boss battle of Final Fantasy, the first final boss of Final Fantasy, and a final boss which will pave the way for countless villains, each with their own stories, their own reasons why they're villains, their own power, their own flair that they bring, their theme that they bring. And it all starts, of course, from the Knight Garland, who only has the basic theme of he is a knight, he is a warrior, he is strong, he lives to fight. That's all he ever knows. That's all he ever wants is the fight, the battle. And it's a simple concept, but this simple concept again brought forth the road to many characters in the series. Whether it's the Emperor from Final Fantasy II, who wanted to bring hell to the world and rule the world of hell and that. Whether it's Ultimecia from 8, who wanted to bring compress time into one world where she can rule, or it's Seymour from 10, and he wanted to wanted to break in the cycle of life and death. Garland is the precursor for all of these characters, all of these villains wanting to destroy the worlds that they are in some shape or form. And it all starts from Garland, from the villain of the first Final Fantasy game, who again paved the way for this trope of villains wanting to destroy the world, wanting to bring the world to its knees, and with them as the person with the cause of it. And it wasn't Final Fantasy who started this, but it was Final Fantasy who made it mostly popular in video games. Because you had villains like you had Ganon in The Legend of Zelda, but of course The Legend of Zelda wasn't really known back then. It wasn't known as well as it is now. So it wasn't massively clear about Ganon's motives. Ganon wants the Triforce of Power. He wants to take over Hyrule, but there wasn't as much explanation for his motives, his reason to be until we have these later games. Final Fantasy, of course, did that differently. From the very start, you know what Garland is trying to do. You know why Garland wants to do what he wants to do. You know why Garland fights for his reason to be. You know that. And that is something Final Fantasy has always been praised for as well. The stories, I mentioned this earlier, the stories, they've always been praised for stories that, yeah, they can be complicated sometimes, but you always know what's going on. And because of stuff like Final Fantasy has been praised countless times for the stories that are created in this series. And again, it all stems from this one game that came out 37 years ago on what was basically Square Enix's swan song. Looking up in chat, we also have Born of Kokiri in. Yes, we have Born of Kokiri, someone who also does a podcast. Please go check it out. He does a Legend of Zelda podcast called The Kokiri Chronicles. So please go and check out his podcast, and hopefully you will like it. We've also got Bronx saying 4 orbs in NES FF1. Not sure if they were orbs or crystals in Japanese original version. Now, that is an interesting point, Bronx, because they are called crystals they were called crystals in the Japanese original version. But when the North American version came out, crystals was mistranslated as orbs. So that is why in the North American version of Final Fantasy 1, you have the crystals called orbs. And although it was a mistranslation, it's not far off because in some of the games the crystals have in fact come in the form of orbs. Most notably Final Fantasy VII, where the crystals of that game are the materia. The crystals of that game are the materia that you can find all out the world, that the characters use for spells and summons and support. Those orbs are the crystals of that game. So while it was a mistranslation in the original FF1, that mistranslation has in fact led to orbs still being used in the series, or even if it's just jewels from Final Fantasy 9, or spheres from Final Fantasy 10. So you're not far off with the fact that mistranslation happened still led the way for certain things in certain objects in the game being considered crystals / orbs. But yeah, honestly, that is an interesting point. It's an interesting way to see the differences between the different versions. Okay, and of course, like I said, back to the story as well. And of course, the story wasn't just about you going to fight Garland, you going to stop the time loop, to stop chaos. Sorry, what's something in my eye? It was also about these warriors of light would also go and help people. They like dwarfs and a prince who got cursed by a dark elf. They didn't just have to go straight to Garland. They helped people along their journey. They met people on their journey. They learned about all sorts of people on their journey, the plight of other towns, other cities, and at the end of it, this helped shape them into the warriors they are, into the warriors of light that they would then become. And this has become a recurring theme in the series as well from this game, where each of the characters undergoes this kind of journey, this journey of growth, this journey of where they learn more about themselves. You got Cloud in 7 learning about himself, or Squall in FF8 starting to open up to people after enclosing himself within himself. So these characters from first Final Fantasy, because they've gone and helped people on their journey, they've gone and helped people who they don't need to help. They have paved the way for the selfless, heroic, and just magnanimous characters we have in the series now that have the mantle Warrior of Light. And something else as well that I hadn't touched on as well was the artwork of Final Fantasy as well. Something Final Fantasy is also known for is the artwork, the character designs, the concept art. And the concept art, as you can see on the cover of the first Final Fantasy game, you can see the concept art, or as you can see on the intro to the podcast, you have the Warrior of Light on the right, and Garland on the left. Now, those aren't the original designs, of course. Those are the designs from Dissidia games. But yeah, but when the games first came out, there was a lot of discussion on how they should make the heroes look. They wanted a hero, you could tell they were a hero of light. You could tell they were a warrior of light. You could tell they were a hero. They were a strong character, and they wanted them to look like the classes as well. So then this, of course, led forth to the Warrior of Light being the first Warrior of Light. The main character of Final Fantasy One, well, the main characters, who are just called the Warrior of Light. This led to their design being a silver-haired warrior, another something else that would occur in the series. Such as with the characters of Sephiroth and Kuja and Ultimecia, where characters have silver hair, but they have power and status within the story. They've got a cemented place in the story. And Final Fantasy has gone through a lot of art changes as the game series has progressed. Of course, you've got the pre-rendered backgrounds of the PS1 era. You've got the more 3D backgrounds of the PS2 onwards era, like PS3 era, to even the more realistic looking art style of Final Fantasy 16 that we have today. Well, it looks more real. It's close to realistic anyway. And of course, that has all stemmed from the concept art and the art style from this game, where it has just improved over the series. Because this game starts off with 8-bit characters. It starts off with 8-bit characters, no smaller than that on the screen, like tiny sprites. It went from sprites to full-on 3D models to straight-up motion capture to where we are now. And of course, as I said, this is all stemmed from this game 37 years ago. A game that has honestly just paved the way for so many RPGs doing the same with 3D models and motion capture, and some of them even still following the style of the original Final Fantasy 7. Some JRPGs these days, they still even use sprites or 8-bit. They still use sprites or 8-bit or just tiny character models. They still use some of them still use the art style that Final Fantasy 1 and the earlier games have used. Because even though it's an old style of art, it's an old art style. They use them because they know that's what people enjoy back in the day. That's where Final Fantasy started. It did well for Final Fantasy, and the older art styles are honestly just still beloved today, even with the 3D models and motion capturing we have. And yeah, Final Fantasy has definitely again just dropped a whole bunch of it's inspired a whole genre of games in RPGs and JRPGs. Like technically they're sort of different. JRPGs is a subgenre, but I'm putting them the same. But yeah, it's inspired a whole countless genre of RPGs, JRPGs. Again, you've got Persona, you've got the Tales series, Ni no Kuni. You've got so many RPG games that have taken reference and inspiration from Final Fantasy because of what the first Final Fantasy game has done. Because of what the foundation it has laid in the gaming world by being as successful as it was back then. As successful as it was back then, and just how well received it was back then. Just get my drink as well. Now, of course. Oh, looking at chat as well. Thank you for the follow, Dtench01. I appreciate it very much. Welcome in. Bronx says, FF1 gave us the direct visual ancestor for beloved Vivi. Yes, exactly. As I mentioned earlier, you have one of the most beloved characters in the series. You've got Vivi Orniter from Final Fantasy 9. Now, anyone who has seen Vivi's design, can see that he has the design of a black mage. He's got the brown pointed hat. He's got the blue cloak. And he's generally the black mage's faces visual the faces are obscured, so all you can see is shadow and yellow eyes. So Vivi obviously is a big reference. Yes, exactly, Bronx, the Jawa eyes. So Vivi is obviously a big reference to the first Final Fantasy game where we have Black Mage. And again, even characters that you wouldn't notice as well, they also have taken inspiration from the first Final Fantasy as well. Excuse me while I have a drink. Even they have taken reference as well, like Garnet from FF9, for example. In the game of FF9, at the start of the game, Garnet wears a white cloak. Now, this isn't a normal cloak. She wears a white cloak that has red triangles around the hem of the hood and around the hem of the cloak. Many people may not know, or anyone who hasn't played the first Final Fantasy may not know this, or the earlier Final Fantasies. But that white cloak with red triangles is the design for the white mage in Final Fantasy 1. So it's not just Vivi it's not just Vivi who is Vivi's design, which is descended from Final Fantasy 1. You've got daggers. You've got Freya from Final Fantasy 9. I'm using Final Fantasy 9 a lot as a reference, but I just kind of know a lot about it. But you've got Freya from Final Fantasy 9, who, while being a dragoon, her outfit also references red mages from Final Fantasy 1. The pointed red hat with the wings on it, the red cloak. You've got all sorts of characters in all the Final Fantasy games that their outfits will take reference from these 6 classes in some shape or form. Where even Cloud has like a gauntlet on his arm for armor, or the great sword. You've got, of course, Zell. He's got the gloves with the monk. He's got, and it's just, again, these classes have just paved the way for. I know I say that a lot. They've paved the way and just gave inspiration to a lot of the characters in the games, like the designs and that. And it's another point that just shows how mentally impactful. Excuse me, how impactful Final Fantasy has been since its inception. And then one thing that Final Fantasy does a lot as well with its games as well are themes. Like each game has its own theme which centers around it. And again, all starting from Final Fantasy 1, with the theme of Final Fantasy 1 being the most important theme. 4 Warriors of Light, or Warriors of Light, embarking on an adventure with crystals of some kind to save the world. Whether it's a futuristic world of machines and metal and robots to a medieval world like the first Final Fantasy game. These games have a theme that revolves around these world. And of course, this is all stems from, again, the first Final Fantasy game, where the main theme is Warriors of Light traveling with crystals to save the world. Good versus evil. This legendary series starts with this game with the simple theme of heroes battling evil, embarking to rescue a princess, only to find out their journey has yet to begin. Like it has, their journey is meant to begin, has only just begun. They're and they end up fighting a bigger enemy than that they expected, and it showed there's more than the competition of the quest. There's the characters will always, there's not just kill this enemy, save the princess. They will always find that there's a bigger thing they have to step up to. There's a bigger quest, there's a bigger mission that they have to step up to, a bigger enemy they have to fight. And again, these are recurring themes that all started with the first Final Fantasy game. Just showing that these games have honestly just made such an impact in all sorts of ways, even with their own series. Um, Now, of course, now I'm going to talk about the some of the development of the game. Some of the development of the game. Um, well, I said earlier. Well, it turns out I misremembered something earlier as well. I've only just unfortunately figured it out. But I mentioned earlier that they were intending to be Final Fantasy to be the only game in the series. I unfortunately misremembered this wrong. But that's I put my hands up and say that, because what it actually was is it turns out that they originally wanted to call the game Fighting Fantasy. Unfortunately, that name was already taken. But of course, I think we can all agree Final Fantasy just sounds better. It just sounds better. It sounds more epic. You know, like you got people constantly going, will this be the Final Fantasy? Will this be the final game? Will this be where they end it? And it brings forth that mystery, that mystery that all that you can expect from adventure. That mystery of, again, will this be the last game in the series? Where will this adventure take us? What will this adventure entail? Who will we fight with this adventure? It's honestly, it's brought forth, yeah, it's brought forth that mystery, that question that's on everyone's minds because of the title change. Is this the Final Fantasy? What does Final Fantasy mean? What do they mean by last Final Fantasy? There's a lot of questions and theories and myths that have all come from this question, this title. And again, it's all because of the first Final Fantasy. But I think we can all agree, I think most of us can agree, that Final Fantasy is a badass name. It is a perfect name for a series that draws you into a world of mystery and adventure and magic, like and light. You know, it is a perfect name for the start of that legendary franchise, which has brought us so much joy and mystery and mixed and just utter wonder. And of course, it hasn't just started with games as well. This game inspired so many. It has inspired so many spin-offs, like manga adaptations. You know, there was a manga adaptation brought out in 1989, literally just called Final Fantasy. You know, it has inspired manga. It's inspired anime. You know, there's an anime called Final Fantasy Unlimited. I don't recommend it because it's not that great personally, but it's inspired novels. It's brought it's brought out anniversary editions, each with different features. The series is constantly expanding, bringing new merchandise, bringing new artwork, new theories, even going as far as having one of the world's biggest orchestra shows, like gaming music shows. This Distant Worlds Final Fantasy, where you get to see the music of Final Fantasy, and this has all come from this one game that came out in 1897 and took the world by storm. And not even just on NES as well. Of like as I said, it's also come out on various consoles. 1987. I apologize about, yes, not 1897. But yeah, it's also not just that. It's also come out on various consoles. You know, PlayStation 2, Game Boy, DS, Switch, even Nintendo 64. There was even a Nintendo 64 Final Fantasy. I believe it was Final Fantasy 2, I think. I might remember that wrong. But yeah, even on N64, there was at least one Final Fantasy on 64. And again, it's honestly just inspired a whole bunch of things that we now see in modern games that you wouldn't think. Not even in just Final Fantasy as well. Big Final Fantasy has also become so popular, so renowned all the world over in its 37 years of life of runtime, that even other games reference it. Even other games reference it, like your other stuff reference it. Like you've got Dead Fantasy, which Rooster Teeth made, an animated series which Rooster Teeth made. You've got Final Fantasy being referenced in Parasite Eve. You've got Final Fantasy being referenced in but just all sorts of games. And there's always, of course, there's also been crossovers. There's been, crossovers, tributes, Easter eggs, references, all because of because of one simple game that came out in 1987 that they probably didn't think would take off this well. They probably didn't realize just how much of an impact Final Fantasy would make in the gaming world as, in my opinion, the best RPG series ever created. And I know obviously I'm biased when I say that, but I honestly believe it because it has something for everyone. Something for everyone where it's got, different themes for people. It's got different characters for people, music, whatever people, makes people gravitate to these series. Excuse me. It all came from Final Fantasy. And yeah, like honestly, it's just one of those games where, like I said, they probably didn't expect it to take off. But I honestly, Final Fantasy has pretty much become the Pokemon of RPG series, with how popular Pokemon has become, with how much money Pokemon makes. Like Pokemon, I believe I believe it's the world's second most sold franchise. I may be wrong, because I think Minecraft is no, it might be the first or might be second. I can't remember, but Final Fantasy has basically become the Pokemon of the world because of how popular it is, because of how many because of how many countries it's been to, how many hearts it's touched, how many people have entered this series and discovered a world of adventure and magic and wonder and good, evil, theme, all sorts of themes. A world of light. There's come a world of light that they can't help but be enraptured by. They can't help but want, like and when they're fans of the series, is you can't help but be you can't help but be enraptured by it, enamored by it. You can't help but many people can't help but want to see more in the series. What's the next step in the series? And again, all of this renown, all of this legendary series, all of this wonder, the mystery, the mystique, the absolute joy that people feel for Final Fantasy has all come from this one game. This one game that has led to it has led to one of the world's from what I've seen, one of the world's biggest communities, with everyone with everyone coming together and sharing their experiences with the game, sharing the game they love the most, what they love about the games the most, characters, music, story, weapons, equipment, magic summons, all sorts. It's a series that has brought many people together, a series that has brought many people together as they each share their experience in the worlds that these games create. Whether it's the first Final Fantasy sharing, what party setup did they use, to Final Fantasy 7, what materia setups, Final Fantasy 4, what characters they like the most, what they love about the series, and just this series has brought forth, again, as I said, one of the biggest communities ever because of this one game. I would not say it's a stretch to say that Final Fantasy is possibly it's one, like I said, it's one of the biggest communities ever, if not the biggest. I don't think it is the biggest, but it's definitely up there. And again, all because of this one game, this one shot game that came out in 1987. Came out in 1987 and just brought forth a whole franchise. It was the flagship for, again, one of, in my opinion, the best RPG series ever created, the best RPG series ever devised, an RPG series that paved the way for more RPG series for them to take influence from. And even in Final Fantasy itself, the older games still reference Final Fantasy 1, it still gives love to to its origins. It never forgets its origins. It with constant references, constant throwbacks, callbacks, music tracks, art, all sorts of things that where you can see in the games about the first Final Fantasy, where you can see where people are constantly reminded where the series has come, how far the series has come, how it's progressed, how it's grown, how it's evolved, how it has changed from turn-based battles to more action or to more action-oriented combat. Where and where again, there's something for everyone. Where I personally still love the turn-based of the older games as opposed to the action ones. But it just shows that Final Fantasy is now a series that there's something for everyone. There's something for everyone. Where no matter what what you like, there's something for everyone. Even the games that people don't like as much, like Final Fantasy 3, I've seen people don't like that much. Even they have a lot of love. Like, Final Fantasy 3, Final Fantasy 12, even Final Fantasy 13, which have been controversial in the series. They have all those all that joy and all that renown for those games and those communities for those games have all stemmed from this one game that has, again, paved the way for countless games, countless installments in the series. And just it's just been an amazing adventure that doesn't seem to end. And I personally don't want it to end anytime soon. But yeah, and again, it's all just stemmed from this one game, this one shot game that had simple themes, but those simple themes brought forth a whole plethora of inspirations within its own series, within other franchises. And it just shows again that it just shows again how much again of an impact in the gaming world Final Fantasy has had, and all because Square Enix wanted to make their own JRPG, their own RPG. Looking at chat, Bronx says FF is the Pokemon of the world. I don't know whether to agree with you or change you to over that. I would say it's the Pokemon of the RPG world, because of how popular and successful it is. Even later RPG games, like again, Persona, Tales, Ni no Kuni, even they, while doing amazingly well, even they probably most likely wouldn't exist if not for Final Fantasy paving the way for RPG games, paving the way and changing the RPG genre forever. Because with the inception of Final Fantasy 1, with the creation of Final Fantasy 1, the RPG gaming series may not have even taken off. It may not have even taken off. We may not have even gotten the later Zelda games. We may not have gotten more Dragon Quest games. We may not have gotten Tales games, Persona games, or any games that are like JRPGs and that. We may not have gotten any of those if it wasn't for Final Fantasy. Yeah, it wasn't for Final Fantasy. Bronx also says FF brings everyone together so they can battle to the death of which is their favorite, which is the worst. About their team Tifa or Team F. Yeah, we won't go into that. We won't go into the team ships and all that. We won't get to we won't go into the team ships and that. But yeah, Valkor says Yoshitaka Amano still does the art for the series this day. Yes, the creator of the person who has done the art from the very first Final Fantasy has been the amazing Yoshitaka Amano, whose art is always amazing, whose concept art is always astounding and beautiful, and shows just how otherworldly the Final Fantasy series is. Again, with the concept art for the Knight, for the Warrior of Light, you've got the concept art for Cloud, you've got the concept art for Sidon, Vivi, Tidus. It's like, even if it's not the final product, we still get treated to amazing art ideas, amazing art concepts that all brought and all ended up they all got brought together to culminate in what we already have, with the art constantly evolving and getting better. Again, from hand drawn to sprites to 3D models to from sprites to 3D models to sprites to 3D models to motion capture. The art has always constantly changed. Magical Valkyrie also says you forgot the biggest one, which has a connected Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts. Yes, because even outside of even outside of well, outside, no, Final Fantasy has even touched other non-video game companies such as, like Valk has mentioned, Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts is a Kingdom Hearts is a Disney game. Kingdom Hearts is a Disney game that is a collaboration between Disney and Square Enix, where Final Fantasy characters came together with Disney characters to create a world, create an RPG series an RPG series that perfectly follows. Like, even though the Final Fantasy characters have appeared less and less in Kingdom Hearts always follows the theme of Final Fantasy, the mechanics of Final Fantasy. You've got magic, you've got summons, you've got weapons, equipment, you've got characters, you've got worlds, you've got music, you've got art, you've got the main character Sora, who is a warrior of light, figuratively and literally. It all follows the themes of Final Fantasy from which it stemmed. And even Kingdom Hearts, which has again another community that is one of the biggest in the world. Even that stems from the first Final Fantasy. If Final Fantasy hadn't have existed, Kingdom Hearts wouldn't exist, and Kingdom Hearts has become one of the most beloved franchises. Kingdom Hearts has become one of the most beloved franchises in the entire world. And again, it wouldn't exist if not for Final Fantasy, if not for the first Final Fantasy game. If it wasn't for the first Final Fantasy game, Kingdom Hearts, again, I know I'm repeating myself, but Kingdom Hearts wouldn't exist. We probably most likely wouldn't have more Dragon Quests. We wouldn't have more, wouldn't more have RPGs that exist today if not for the first Final Fantasy, if not for the impact it had. So even games that aren't actually called Final Fantasy will still have an impact, will still be impacted from Final Fantasy. And again, because of the legend it's created, because of the RPG world it's created, the genre it's basically revolutionized. Final Fantasy has had one of the biggest impacts in the gaming world since ever. And that is simply because of one game that has led to, honestly, it wouldn't be a stretch to say that RPG games are some of the world's most sold games. Like many of the even many of the Game of the Year nominees this year. I know one of them is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but some of the other nominees like Astrobot, Astrobot, Elden Ring, even though that's the DLC, not the game, but I digress. You've got Metaphor, you've got Black Myth Wukong. They are all role-playing games in some form or fashion. They all have role-playing game mechanics and aesthetics and qualities of some kind. Even if they're not classed as an RPG game, they still have that mechanic of, you take the role of someone, you take the role of a character, you go into a world, you battle, you journey, you experience the story, the music, the art. That is again, these aren't RPGs. Not all of these are RPGs, but they're still influenced by Final Fantasy because of the role-playing aspect. They're all because of the role-playing aspect, which again stems from Final Fantasy. These games have basically become what they are. And it's another sign. It's another sign that Final Fantasy again has just. It's again that Final Fantasy has just. It's just made such an impact. It's just again, it's brought forth all these games that have taken inspiration from it. Like, I know many people will disagree with me, and that's fair enough. But again, it's a lot of these games, and some of these games that are Game of the Year or nominees. A lot of these games most likely wouldn't be the way they are if not for Final Fantasy revolutionizing the RPG genre, revolutionizing the mechanics, the art, the role playing, the questing, the adventuring, the world building. If it wasn't for Final Fantasy revolutionizing any of this, I it is safe to say a lot of these games today wouldn't be the way they are. They wouldn't be as good. They wouldn't be as impactful. They wouldn't bring people in as much. And again, because of Final Fantasy revolutionizing the series, making it because of Final Fantasy, excuse me, because of Final Fantasy making its mark on the gaming world. Because of Final Fantasy making its mark, taking that first step into the RPG genre, and again revolutionizing it, changing it. The RPG genre is constantly evolving. It's constantly evolving to something new, something better, new, something different, something again mystifying, mystical. Just it's the RPG genre is constantly changing with new innovative ideas and new ways of doing RPG games. And again, this all stems from one game created in 1987, created in 1987 near the start of video games themselves, because video games generally didn't get that popular until the mid 80s, until like the mid 80s, when games like Mario and Zelda and Metroid came out that everyone could enjoy. You know, Mario being the most well known because it revolutionized video games. But again, because Final Fantasy took that first step in RPGs, the video game world was shook to its foundation because of the impact Final Fantasy had on the series and the impact it's still having today. Even for the games that don't do as much, don't do as well, like 16 and this Final Fantasy 7 remake and Rebirth didn't do as well as Square Enix were hoping, but they still had impacts. It just goes to show that even if the game isn't massively successful, those small players that do play it, those small players that do play these games and pass on and and show people these games, and the constant the players who constantly want to see more from Square Enix, those people are helping this game series that started out in 1987, that starts out 37 years ago with one simple RPG. Those players are continuing the legend that game has created, and that game is still inspiring constant change, constant improvements, constant innovations, just amazing worlds and narration and narratives and art and music and characters that many people love today. Again, they're always changing, they're always being innovative, they're always unique, they're constantly unique. And again, it all stems from the first Final Fantasy. Yes, the first Final Fantasy was flawed, where like most first in the series are flawed, but it's from those flaws that the series has been able to build up and build and build and build to the peak of gaming that it is today, the peak of RPGs that the series is today. Again, one of the biggest and most successful communities has come from such humble beginnings. As Sir Francis Drake said, sic parvis magna, from greatness from small beginnings. And that is where Final Fantasy has come from. It has come from a simple RPG made in 1987 with not that it didn't have the resources we have now. It wasn't as big of a game as we have now. It wasn't as as bright and shiny as the games we have now. But from that small game, a legend has been born. A legend has been born. A legend is growing, is cultivating, is changing. From that one game. Again, the video game industry has been shaken to its foundation because of that one game, bringing in multiple mechanics that even non-RPGs use to this day in some shape or form. Looking at Twitch chat, we've also got Red Beth coming in. Hello, Red Beth. Let's have a look. Behind you should give a flare. Could Final Fantasy inspire the game of Pokemon? Yes, because Pokemon is still technically, well, it's not a role-playing game technically. Yeah, it's not classed as a role. Well, it is and it isn't. But it still it has role playing elements. You know, you play as a character. You pick the, you play as a character who journeys who journeys on an adventure. And yeah, so Final Fantasy, it could be said that it could be the like Reenbright has just said in Twitch chat. It inspired turn-based combat. Any game like the Pokemon series may not have turn-based combat or turn-based combat that was as good as it is now if it wasn't for Final Fantasy. So it's safe to say, yeah, Final Fantasy did most likely inspired Pokemon in some shape or form. And Sora 850, well, another of my mods has come in. You mean Final Fantasy is not a Kingdom Hearts spin-off? Nope, other way around. Yeah, could Final Fantasy inspire the game of Resident Evil? Yes, but less so. Less so, Beth, because Resident Evil was more inspired by shooting kind of games. But again, there's still the role-playing aspect. You still take on the role of a character. You still go on a sort of an adventure. So yes, it's slight inspiration there. Dragon Quest started it, but yeah, exactly. Yeah, Dragon Quest did start it. But again, Final Fantasy revolutionized it. They improved on the turn-based combat and kept on improving on it until they decided to try something new with action-based combat. And yeah, so again, something for everyone. We've got Bronx saying, I know you said it has role-playing elements. My brain did role-playing elephants, and now I need to see a bunch of pachyderms in cosplay doing it over a set of dice. Damn. Oh, God. But yeah, guys, like I said, just... I think I've waffled on a lot, but hopefully you guys can see that this series has just done, this game has just done a lot for the gaming industry. That Final Fantasy has done a lot for the gaming industry by being what it is, by being the probably being a precursor to RPG video games. I mean, granted, we had Dragon Quest before it, but Dragon Quest wasn't as successful as Final Fantasy was. It did well, but they didn't do much with it, and they didn't do much with it at that point. Even in the second game, they didn't change much. But because of Final Fantasy, again, the RPG genre has just been revolutionized, and the RPG genre is constantly growing and changing to fit modern audiences, to fit what people want to see, with different, different worlds, different stories, different characters, different spells, equipment, magic, summons, all sorts of stuff that video games have today would all sorts of video games that do well today, can't their origins and inspiration can in some shape or form be traced back 37 years to Final Fantasy 1. Bronx says, Bronx also says give us left right combat screens. Yes, side to side combat, where we had that with Mario, but that was constantly moving. But obviously it wasn't the first. It wasn't the first to do left and right combat, but the battle arenas you have in Final Fantasy, they constantly evolved as well. They constantly evolved. They also, they also ended up inspiring many other RPGs to do those kind of things, pre-rendered backgrounds and such. So there's still some inspiration there. And Valk has just said you wouldn't have Honkai Star Rail, not Final Fantasy. Yes, a game that I love playing, Honkai Star Rail, has turn-based combat and RPG elements to it. It's an RPG game. I wouldn't be able to play that if it wasn't for Final Fantasy inspiring the creators in some shape or form to make the game. So again, it's the impact it has the impact it's had throughout history since its inception. You can see everywhere. You can, even again in non-video games, you can see everywhere. Like in Japan, they've got Final Fantasy characters. They've got Final Fantasy characters as merchandise, as mascots for real life merchandise. They even had Lightning from Final Fantasy 13 as a mascot for Louis Vuitton at one point as well. Louis Vuitton fashion wear. So Final Fantasy hasn't just been an inspiration in video games. It has inspired a whole bunch of outside video game stuff. Again, such manga, anime. You've got merchandise, and even like it's just inspired a lot. It's just inspired a lot, and again, it's all come from this one game. Greenbright said Dragon Quest did well in Japan. Yeah, it did well in Japan, but not worldwide. So it like I said, it didn't do as well as Final Fantasy did, because Final Fantasy 1 was also shit worldwide. Final Fantasy 1 was shit worldwide and did amazing worldwide. It sold successfully worldwide. So yeah, you're right. Dragon Quest did do well in Japan, but Final Fantasy just had more of the impact because it went worldwide, and it's loved all over today. Dragon Quest is definitely coming up to Final Fantasy standards in my opinion. I love Dragon Quest. Don't get me wrong, they're amazing games, but it's safe to say Final Fantasy, when people say RPG, 9 times out of 10 they will go straight to Final Fantasy because of the impact Final Fantasy has made in the RPG genre, because the impact has made in the industry of itself of video games. I think I've spoken about everything I can on the origins of Final Fantasy and where this legend has started. Hopefully we will continue to see where the series goes with Final Fantasy 17 or Final Fantasy 7 Part 3, whenever it decides to come out. And hopefully we will see nothing but great things in the next installment. Now, guys, I'm obviously going to end the episode here, but guys, I will say, in the next video, which is going to be on January the 4th, something I don't know if I wonder if many people have noticed this as well. I've chosen to do these episodes on the 4th because 4 Warriors of Light, 4 Crystals, 4 Fiends. It's a theme. There's a theme. There's a running theme with it. So next month on January 4th, I'm going to be doing episode 2 of this, where now that I've spoken about the origins of Final Fantasy, what I'm going to speak about, because I'm not going to do it in order, I'm going to speak about my favorite Final Fantasy game in the series, Final Fantasy 9, and I'm going to be joined by some guests. I'm going to be joining some guests. I won't reveal who they are. I won't reveal who all of them are. But I will reveal that one of them has already popped in chat, because next month I am hopefully going to be joined by again, one of the guests that will join me next month is my mod and friend T-Short 1467, and we're going to talk about us and some other guests are going to talk about Final Fantasy 9, the characters. We're going to talk about the characters, their motives, their backgrounds, and generally what we think about those characters. We're going to talk about what drives the characters. So we are going to get in depth to those characters, and that is going to be on January 4th. Where I hope you guys will join me in the next stage of our Final Fantasy journey, of our Final Fantasy. I hope you guys will join me on that day next month. But thank you for watching, everyone. I hope that you've had a great time. Yeah, I hope you've had a great time watching this episode. Thank you so much for everyone who came into this episode, my very first episode. And I hope that I've hopefully taught you guys some things about Final Fantasy that you didn't know. So once again, thank you guys. I just hope you guys have a great. I hope you guys just continue to have a great adventure in your life, like the Final Fantasy has inspired. Thank you everyone for joining, and may you ever walk in the light of the crystals. Take care, everyone.